first time you ever were exposed to Terence McKenna?
Yeah, that was in college after I had taken psychedelics. So it was either Aiden again who introduced me to Terence McKenna because I know he was a big fan, or I found out about them through The Contortionist, a band that we've mentioned before. It's probably my favorite band, and they are also inspired by Terence McKenna. They did a Ask Me Anything in which they reference him as a major influence.
Oh, it's cool.
Yeah,
I'd love to see that.
yeah, it's really good. And in every time I look at the title I have in front of me of one of the topics that we want to discuss today, which is intuition, as Terence McKenna talks about it, I just hear the lyrics from Language by The Contortionist. Intuition combined with our calculations will revive the mother sun.
Yeah, that definitely has a lot more resonance having watched and listened to all the things I've watched and listened to over the past like week or so, getting ready for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, the whole like history as a progression to some sort of like transition to another epoch that's like quasi eschatological, like end of days.
Eschatological.
So that's let me double check that I'm getting this right. It's basically like the eschatology is like the study of like what happens in the end of days, like the apocalypse.
Oh.
Yeah, the part of theology concerned with death, judgment, and the final destiny of the soul and of humankind.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Terence does seem to go in for really epic ideas, doesn't he?
Yeah.
One thing you can say about whatever he says about anything is that it's not going to be boring.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he can talk just for a long time and not bore you. If you're interested in the same kind of, if you're interested in the things he's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's just fascinating to me because he has so many, I think, really valuable and illuminating ideas, and I don't agree with everything he says. I think he may take some things literally that don't need to be taken literally. I think he can kind of like going a little bit beyond.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly what you mean by taking things too literally, but my kind of quip with him is that especially on the topic of intuition, he really dismisses the whole idea of inductive and deductive logic as being anything really special.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, especially when he uses to support his point the fact that a lot of research in pure mathematics is based on intuition.
Yeah.
Which is definitely true because, you know, the people who are doing the research on the cutting edge of pure math have to have really sharp intuitions about, you know, clever tricks to make things work and, you know, seeing things that no one has seen before. But that's all based on having a very, very rigorous logical knowledge of this huge body of facts.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is that he can be very outlandish sometimes and come to outlandish conclusions. Which are interesting thought experiments, but maybe he doesn't always come to correct conclusions.
Yeah. What would be an example of that for you?
Well, this point you brought up is actually I have the same quip against the way he kind of attacks science and logic at the same time. So why don't we just jump into this concept? So he has this. There's a recording of him talking about the subject of intuition, and he begins the talk by saying that, but kind of identifying what intuition is. He describes it as feeling into things, coming to answers that leave no trail.
Right. I thought that was really interesting way to put it, leaving no trail.
It's kind of a metaphorical, metaphysical representation, and what he seems to mean by that is that you have a conclusion, but you have no argument for it.
Right. And he also talks about how it operates just almost immediately in the moment. Like it takes very little processing time.
I think that's the core of it. And he says that intuition is often express truth in a contraversion to the forward flow of logic.
Right. Which again, I would kind of disagree with that, because I feel like in the end, the two have to kind of come together at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he directly contradicts himself when he says this, because so his main gripe with science is that it is based on inductive reasoning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Trevor, can you tell us, for anyone who doesn't know, what inductive reasoning is?
This is sad because I'm taking a class in exactly this right now, but I need to look it up.
Okay, I'll tell you then.
Can you tell me what it is?
Yeah. So inductive reasoning is when you have a series of outcomes that you look at.
Actually, I can give it a shot.
Yeah.
So in discrete math, which is this class I'm taking right now, an example of inductive reasoning would be, say you have a certain theorem that you want to prove for all numbers x. So you would first assume it's true for x, and then if you can prove that it's also true for x plus 1, then you've proved that it's true for any x.
So in layman's terms, I think what that's saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, so you have a bunch of outcomes in a row, and you say, what happens when we do this thing? And if you do that thing and 100 times in a row it does the same thing as the outcome, then you can expect that the 101st time it will also do that same thing.
Right. I think that's like if you did x plus 1 and then x plus 2 and x plus 3, and you just kept going.
Yeah.
So is he kind of arguing that at any point pretty much anything could happen, no matter what you've seen?
I think that is a part of his argument, although he doesn't say it in those terms, because so he kind of picks apart science, because science is based on inductive reasoning. You have a large sample size, which represents the repetitions, and you see, is there a trend when we do this thing? Is there an outcome that we can predict based on what we've seen before? And so it's true. Science is based on inductive reasoning. Now, there's a counterpart to inductive reasoning, which is deductive reasoning. You want to give a stab at what that is?
I can try. I mean, isn't that basically the whole, like, if you know that if P then Q is true, and P is true, then Q must be true. It's that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like formal logic proofs.
Mm-hmm.
By the use of logic, simply showing that a statement is true.
Right, which goes back to the time of the ancient Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like a really long time.
Yeah, which as does inductive reasoning.
Right. I've always thought it was really beautiful that those same principles are basically what make computers work.
Yeah.
It's like this 2,000-year trajectory of just the same thing being developed and developed and developed.
Yeah. Well, that's wild though, because isn't it true that the computers are based on inductive reasoning.
Well, I think they're based more on the deductive
Mm-hmm.
logic, because it's a bunch of like and, or, nor, not, gates, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
So I think the way that computer synapses work is that there's a fair amount of error that could happen if you just had one of the physical object running the computation. So there would be no certainty involved, because when you have a digital system, you need every single 0 and 1 to be exactly where it wants to be. And if it's not, then something horrible could happen, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, yeah. A single 0 or 1 being off could throw things off.
So as I understand it, there's actually the chips, or I think it's on a lower level than that. It shows my ignorance on the technicality, but the actual physical object, each one has about a 60% chance of giving the right answer. And then the way that they turn that into something that is always 100% of the time true and accurate, as it would seem, is they have like 10 of them, and they have them all do the same computation, and then the consensus among those is much more likely, astronomically more likely, to be accurate.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar. Are you thinking of transistors?
Transistors.
Like
that's the unit I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And how is that connected to?
Oh, it's just interesting that inductive reasoning, which seems to be so. Basically, Terence throws this under the bus and says, "How could you base anything off of inductive reasoning of any value?" And yet, all of computers and everything that they can accomplish is built on inductive reasoning.
Yeah.
In a very literal sense.
Yeah.
But that even isn't the core of why I disagree with his statement on intuition and science, because he goes on to talk about pure maths as being intuitional. Can you describe what he's saying here?
Yeah. Yeah. So he was basically saying that, when a great mathematician sits down to prove something that's never been proved before, or come up with some new idea, that basically it's like a flash of inspiration that they can't explain, that just kind of appears, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, actually, I have this written down. Yeah. So what he says is the first thing they have to do is just they have to conceptualize a bunch of different relationships between different kind of abstract mathematical objects
in the mind.
Right. And it's all in their head. And then they have to explore their intuitions about all those conceptions. And then they kind of go backwards and write formal statements that describe their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, the validity of any of those formal statements depends on it all being able to work logically.
Exactly.
And someone else being able to verify it.
Yeah, that's exactly the gripe I had with it too. Because he says, he makes, I think, a solid point that these pure mathematics are based in intuition, or at least begin with intuition. And then he says, and then there's like some logic stuff after that, but that means that it's all intuition all the way through. There's kind of this like little brain fart there, I think.
Yeah.
As you said, it's the logic of it is paramount to the understanding.
Yeah. To the verification that it that it works at all. I mean, what he might say is that because it maps so beautifully onto nature, it has to be true in some sense
Yeah,
without
right.
being able to verify it logically. And it is kind of I think it is kind of related to the idea that kind of like we were talking about with Gödel or Bach and Gödel's incompleteness theorem, like the system itself can't prove its own validity.
Mm.
Like you can just be the kid that's always asking why after every explanation you're given,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's not really an answer to that besides to construct some other larger formal system. Then you have to prove the validity of that. So
Mm.
he does kind of have a point because uh, theoretically there is no like bottom level that proves something completely, but
Hmm.
I don't think it's as dramatic as he makes it out to be.
Yeah, because let's take it back to his statement about intuition. He says it expresses truth in contravention to the forward flow of logic. That seems to be saying it's true in spite of logic, and that directly contradicts his later statement about pure mathematics, which
Yeah.
is heavily reliant upon logic.
Yeah. Well, I guess if he's dismissing logic, he wouldn't care about these contradictions.
This feels a lot like a conversation that I would constantly try to have with a spiritual friend back in Boulder who was very enmeshed in the spiritualism culture of Boulder.
Was that guy who did acid like every day for like a while?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember meeting him one time. That was something.
Uh-huh. Yeah. He's interesting guy.
When he says it like contradicts or contravenes the flow of the forward flow of logic, I think he's more talking about that intuition is like a jump ahead to where logic would have gotten anyway,
Oh, interesting.
and then you work backwards from that towards what you already know.
Okay,
I think that's kind of what he's saying.
I think that's a really valuable point. And though he does go out of his way to pick apart and say, "Hey, look, science, which is based on inductive reasoning, is not mathematics, which is rooted in intuition and uses deductive reasoning." And he says that science has appropriated math.
Yeah, I mean he does kind of have a point in that the scientific method is imperfect and
Right.
it can be biased, and
Oh,
you know even in an actual science, like the method itself breaks down. It's not as clean as you're taught in like seventh grade.
right, exactly. Because a lot of the greatest revelations to science have been through inspiration and intuition. For example, Darwin's theory of evolution.
Yeah, or just like mistakes.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, I do think I don't think science is just kind of stealing from math and just kind of using it to its own advantage. I think they're pretty deeply interconnected.
Hmm. Why is that?
Well, I guess it depends what kind of science you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking like about like biology, that's actually pretty hard to quantify using math. Way more so than like physics
Hmm.
or even chemistry. Just because it's so complicated. But the fact that you can describe the universe so elegantly, despite the fact that the math gets really hairy sometimes, but the fact that we can come up with those equations that predict so well what's going to happen, or
Hmm.
give us a probability or whatever, I think it's pretty clear that it's not an example of using math for something it wasn't meant for.
Hmm. Though, of course, I think Terence would say that science really has nothing to do with that sort of situation. That it was an intuition that used math, and then you just kind of overlaid it on the world as you see it, and that science as an inductive process had nothing to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's not always the case that it's only through research in pure mathematics that new things are discovered
Mm-hmm.
in other scientific fields. I mean, like, think about Einstein. I mean, he wasn't doing just pure math research. He was actually just thinking about the way the world worked. And yeah, there was definitely intuition involved in that, but he wasn't starting just from pure math. He was starting from observations about how the world worked.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. They're kind of incontrovertible.
Yeah. Although, I mean, we know relativity can't be completely correct because it doesn't explain everything. So it's still kind of wrong in some sense, but yeah, maybe you could argue that the only way we're going to get to a theory of everything is through some kind of pure math, but I don't really know if you can support that.
Yeah, or if a theory of everything is possible.
Yeah. I was listening to this either mathematician or physicist talk about a theory of everything, and this idea that we have this idea that a theory of everything has to be elegant and simple, but that's very, very biased towards our human brains. And if there was some really advanced civilization where they could look at a theory of everything that demands holding 1,000 equations in your head at once, and they could be like, oh yeah, that's so simple and elegant.
Yeah, I don't know. I think once you have things like holding an arbitrary number of equations in your head, then you kind of have to take it all the way to the extreme and say that the only theory of everything is everything, right? Because you can't have a computer to represent something larger than itself.
Right, but you can obviously compress information about anything given a certain set of rules.
Huh.
Yeah, there's actually this idea out there that intelligence is compression, like compression of information.
Oh, go on.
I don't know how much I can say about this, but it's like a computer science thing. Basically, the more concisely you can describe something, the higher the mark of intelligence that displays.
I think you mean to say the quicker you can say it, the better it is.
Yeah. The more concisely you can say something, the better it is.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm surprised we got this far into this without really talking about psychedelics. Hardly at all. It's interesting.
With Terence McKenna, it's like, so we were talking about something, and psychedelics. But actually, before we jump onto the psychedelics train, because there's a lot to say there, I just want to say one more thing about the science and intuition. I think he's getting to an idea here that is really important to recognize, which is that science, while it is a robust view of the world that can teach us a lot, it has its own limitations because it is, at its heart, built upon inductive reasoning. And I think one of the places where that comes out the strongest is when you look at individual experiences and compare them to each other. Because science, by its nature, by needing a larger sample size to be more reliable, has this effect of flattening of the details and reductionism, where it leaves out important differences from individual experience, such as personality, linguistic intent, and uniqueness of individuals.
Right. Right. Yeah. There are certain things that will almost certainly be beyond a very like technical scientific description. And isn't that kind of what people mean by the idea of emergence? Like
Emergence.
so like emergence would be there's no such thing as an ant colony. There's individual ants, but the ant colony is an
Yeah.
emergent property of all the ants acting in a certain way.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, and also because like slime molds, which are super fascinating because they exhibit intelligence in a way that so what a slime mold is, if you're not familiar, is it's kind of like a colony, and at the same time it's like an amoeba. It's like a single-celled organism, but it shapes itself in these weird ways to grow, and the shapes that it forms are capable of solving NP complete problems in order to more effectively optimize their livelihood
Wow.
without having any central nervous system whatsoever.
Yeah, that's wild. So they can like solve mazes and stuff.
Yeah. So they'll solve the maze and find the absolute most direct path through.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, so a lot of people will say that something like consciousness could be an emergent property as well.
Right.
Yeah, that you can't. Yeah, even describing all of the parts doesn't really get at what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that may be the only thing that could describe all of the parts is the thing itself.
Right.
So I guess that leads us to, I think the biggest question here is, Trevor, what have you been smoking?
Nothing. Air.
How's that going up for you?
How's it going?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I haven't smoked anything for pretty much 4 months. Yeah.
Mm.
I think I stopped like June 29th or something. So yeah. I've been mostly able to keep the cravings at bay, but yeah, listening to all this Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna stuff has definitely made me a little sad that I just can't get like really high and think about all this stuff. But
so your experience with sobriety would you say it's been mostly just trying to not want the drug, or?
no, I'd say it's, yeah. I mean, I try to see it more as appreciating the benefits of not doing it, just kind of like more motivation and kind of being more clear-headed and yeah, not having another thing is just kind of a dopamine dump potentially. And also, just not having to worry, being able to worry slightly less about getting coronavirus and it being bad. Yeah, because like I said, by the time I had stopped, basically the fear that I was like dooming myself to die on a respirator in a hospital potentially was taking most of the fun out of the experience.
Yeah, I can see how that could cause you to have anxiety.
Yeah. I guess so. One more thing I wanted to talk about with intuition. I thought it was really interesting what he said about intuition being perceived by society as kind of inherently female, and inherently undesirable. Yeah, I had never really that had never really occurred to me before, but
interesting.
But I mean, it is kind of like a stereotype, right? Like men are supposed to be more logical and be able to think about things more objectively.
Well, let me explain that to you. Don't worry your pretty little head about it.
No.
Yeah, no. If you read period pieces and like books that were written 100, 200 years ago, it's kind of sickening how much they fall into these stereotypes about logic being something that men can do, and women are all, oh, we're so soft and intuitional.
Yeah, and emotional and all that
illogical.
Stuff. Yeah. It was just so deeply ingrained in everyone's thinking, including women. Yeah, most women, they just like didn't even think to
absolutely
to challenge it.
Mm-hmm. And I would say it's not something that we've necessarily transcended as a culture. I think there are a lot of people who still embody these stereotypes, both men and women, who subscribe to this because they haven't addressed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
This is interesting because we're talking about on the verge of talking about feminism in regards to Terence McKenna, and I did find a video where he was talking about this specifically, about what is the place of feminism in regards to like his psychonautic explorations and shamanic psychedelic use. And he kind of starts by saying, I don't know if there really is a way that they fit together, but then he goes on and says, if they did fit together, well, you have a sort of a cultural neurosis in our culture of an ego inflation in the West, and that it's maybe specifically the masculine ego that is being inflated, right? And he quips also that maybe that's just because we don't have enough ego dissolving psychedelic plants in our culture.
Of course.
But then he says that this ego inflation of the masculine is represented by our religion as a culture in the West. Monotheism is, he says, I think he says like the only religion he's aware of that the head honcho God man doesn't have, Big Daddy doesn't have anything to do with women at all.
Yeah,
right?
No, I think we maybe saw the same thing. He described it as locker room religion, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Mary would be the obvious counterexample to that, but I guess she doesn't really count because she's human.
Yeah. Well, you had the virgin birth. You know, God doesn't touch.
It was the Holy Spirit. It wasn't God. Well, I guess it wasn't the Father. It was the Holy Spirit.
I see.
Even though it would make sense. Well, I might be getting my theology wrong. It would make more sense if it was the Father, I guess, because that's his whole thing, is to be the Father. I don't know.
The daddy.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and that that masculine inflated ego is obsessed with punishment and power and punishing people for breaking arbitrary taboos, which they call sins.
Right, and that's so tied to the idea of the body and just kind of just kind of happenstance things that with like sexuality or digestion, that kind of thing that like existed before all the religion and culture imposed their rules on it.
Yeah. So Terence has this theory that he's famous for floating, which is a really fascinating idea. It's the as you put it, the stoned ape theory, where he kind of outlines it like you had in Africa apes in the trees, or our predecessors in trees. And then there's a climate change where it becomes much more arid in prehistory, and so all of these gathering communities, food gathering, suddenly have to take to the plains, the grasslands, and become hunters and omnivores, and basically eat everything, or try everything to see, is this a viable food source? And one of the substances, or one class of substances, is psychedelics, which is well known to grow on cow patties. So you have out in the fields, out in the plains, you have cows or other similar animals grazing and leaving their dung behind, and then these psychedelic mushrooms growing out of that, and then you have some half-starved ape trying to look for food and finds the psychedelic mushrooms and eats them.
Yeah, it's really really fascinating, and so and kind of the continuation of that is that was a very integral part of our human evolution of language and the the growth and size of our brains and that whole thing.
Yeah. Which I'd buy it. It seems to explain a lot that otherwise wouldn't make as much sense.
Yeah, I think it's pretty plausible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did. Maybe this is something that Dennis McKenna was saying, but like one of the main guys who has proposed that theory does not do psychedelics at all. So it's not like it's the only people who are proposing it are biased because they believe psychedelics have some magical power. I thought it was interesting because I had heard that theory before, but I never really thought of the fact that it doesn't just extend to psychedelics. Like there are lots of plants with medicinal properties that they could have encountered too.
Right. Yeah.
And just kind of found by chance.
Yeah, that have different effects to our physiology that would. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Of course, I'm sure there were a lot of people dying from eating poisonous stuff too.
Yeah, but you gotta eat something, right? Trial and error. And I think this is part of my own modern philosophy today, as I've adopted it from friends who have made this their lifestyle, which is to expose yourself to a wide variety of natural things. Go out in nature and not only walk amid the trees, but take a leaf, put it in your mouth, touch the dirt, put your fingers into your mouth with the dirt on them, and in doing so, you're exposing yourself to a wider microbiome, increasing your fortitude in your immune system.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that we're how isolated we are in the society we live in is creating medical problems, food allergies and that kind of thing, because those problems don't really exist at all in developing countries where the there's not so much isolation and just sterilization.
Yeah, definitely. And not even just medical problems, but just well-being, general sense of wellness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet we're going to learn so many crazy things about the human microbiome in the next 100 years. I feel like the study of it is very young. If you're enjoying what you're listening to so far, we really hope you'll consider supporting us somehow. You can either find us on Facebook or Instagram and follow us there, or visit our website at postwavepodcast.com, or you can even get in touch with us directly at postwavepodcast@gmail.com. On our website, you can also find links to follow us on your favorite platform, and we really appreciate when people leave us a nice review or give us a follow.
Yeah, we hear that's a really valuable way to spread our podcast in these early days.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, so he has this way of framing the Genesis in the Bible of a struggle over a psychedelic substance, right?
Yeah, that was really cool.
It's so spot on.
It was the first drug bust.
Yeah. Hey, you can't eat that.
That's pure knowledge.
Yeah. Don't eat of this tree or you will become like us, with the knowledge of good and evil.
Makes me think of that meme with Pooh the bear.
I don't know this meme that you're talking
I don't know.
about.
He's like dipping his hand into the honey, and I think Tigger says something like, "Don't eat that, Pooh. You can't eat that. You're eating something."
Right.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I see.
Find an example.
You're eating knowledge.
Yeah. Pure metaphysical knowledge. Yeah, and I think that kind of gets back to the idea of history is leading towards some kind of knowledge like that about our place in the world, or what we are, or the nature of the universe. That's kind of, I think he says something like, find the actual, yeah, he says religion is kind of an anticipation of this apocalyptic event where we cross into a new state of being.
Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, in most major religions there's some kind of end of days story. And in the Christian Bible, it's the second coming of Christ. And
hey, nice job, Christ.
The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They might be involved somehow with the second coming.
oh dear. I don't want to know how that's involved.
I think dead people are also involved.
What people?
Dead people.
Oh. Yeah. I'm speechless.
So were they. Okay.
I just love listening to you crack yourself up.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, the place my mind goes to, of course, is artificial intelligence, because I think that will. Did you say something?
What? No. Dick jokes.
So the place my mind automatically goes, of course, is artificial intelligence, and the idea of a singularity that's going to be a very, very significant event in human history that we can't really see beyond. We can't really tell what the outcomes are going to be. And I think that will be the kind of thing that redefines our relationship with the universe and our place in it, and our knowledge of what's actually going on. And yeah, I mean, what it means to be human fundamentally.
Yeah. I remember having some thoughts after having taken psychedelics of thinking that I, or else the universe, was potentially on a trajectory towards ascending the physical plane that we know of 3 dimensions plus one time, and working its way into higher numbers of spatial dimensions. And this idea was kind of, I think, also championed by Terence McKenna. He seems to have believed this or something of the sort in a very literal sense. I think that the AI technological singularity is, at the very least, a very good parallel to that concept.
Yeah, and I think it's possible that could happen without AI, but the AI is just kind of accelerating it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think
Or
it all has to do with the accumulation of knowledge.
mm-hmm. Yeah. That the AI is maybe like the sinew of it. It's the structure by which that change foments, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or it's just kind of augmenting our ability.
Mm. Or else maybe redefining what we are, because to achieve such a transformation, right? It's a birth onto a newer plane that he's talking about, but at the same time, it's the end of days. It's a transformation. It's a loss in some regards of what you were, because what you were couldn't have achieved that transformation. In order to achieve the transformation, you have to become something greater, something different. And so by embracing technological singularity as part of our own sense of self, as opposed to identifying ourselves just as flesh and bones, biological creatures, we are embracing that change, which could take us into the higher plane of existence.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Yeah.
And that's an example of like a really out there sort of statement that I wouldn't necessarily stand behind, but since Terence McKenna said it, I'll say it in this context for sure. It's a fascinating idea that I can't dismiss out of hand, and it's something that I like to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the higher dimensional thing, but yeah, all the rest of it, I think could totally be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like it's not. I would never make an assertion that I think that we are going to go from this number of dimensions to a higher number of dimensions, but I think it's a really valuable thought experiment to consider that maybe, as outlandish as that sounds, as impossible, literally impossible as that sounds, maybe there is meaning to it. Maybe there is a way in which that actually is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends how loosely you're taking the meaning of the word dimensions.
And I mean it in actually a literal sense, in a
Yeah.
physical spatial dimension sort of sense,
Hmm.
right? Because why? Here's the question that flummoxes me. Why 3 dimensions? Why are there 3 dimensions?
I mean, that's the same thing as asking like why is the speed of light what it is? Why is
Mm-hmm.
uh why are any of the constants of the universe what they are? I mean, yeah, it is it maybe it's a little more interesting than that because it's it's just so fundamental to the way everything works.
Yeah, and
But
so arbitrary, right?
I mean, it might seem that way to us, but I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it depends what you mean by arbitrary.
Because it's so easy to imagine that there could be a way of having life that does not rely on being in that particular number of dimensions. I think the experience of psychedelics can be a really valuable lens at which to look at this. I've personally had experiences where it seemed to me as though I were trespassing upon existence in a different number of dimensions, in four spatial dimensions.
Huh. Can you kind of explain what that was like?
Yeah. So this particular instance I'm thinking about was the first time that you did any acid, which we all did 2 tabs of acid, and this was when me and Aiden dicked off and walked around campus and stuff, and we went to a performance of people like dancing on campus. It was really good, and and I had the experience of sitting in the audience, and the whole audience is like laughing and enjoying the performance, and then my experience was that just this knowledge and awareness of all of these entities around me, all of them laughing and seeing me and laughing at me as this being this three-dimensional ape creature, which through the use of this substance is having the temporary experience of stepping onto this plane of existence with a greater number of dimensions. So these were like these extra dimensional entities all around me. They're all laughing. They're all laughing at me. Like, what is this thing doing? And it was very good natured and kind, but they were all laughing at me.
Huh. I guess I'm still not. So you felt like the people around you were from extra dimensions, kind of?
Well, it was more that I saw them not as apes, not as human meatbags, but as I was having an awareness of them as entities, and as entities, they existed not confined to 3 dimensions, but more naturally in a higher number of dimensions.
Huh. I mean, I could see saying that like consciousness itself is kind of like another dimension because it seems to necessarily exist
I
in a separate place.
I don't buy that. I feel like that's kind of gilding the lily, right? That's taking the iridescence on the butterfly wing, as Terence McKenna talks about, which I don't really subscribe to that sort of framing.
What do you mean by that?
Just that, like, consciousness being like this thing that sort of happens accidentally after the fact, on top of everything else. It goes back to what we were talking about in the Nagel episode of what it's like to be a bat, where he talks about how you have these complete systems which purport to describe consciousness or describe what thought or whatever it was, but that somehow managed to leave out consciousness altogether. And that when you have a complete system like that, and then you try to add consciousness in on top of that, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of the idea of consciousness existing in some kind of extra dimension, I think of, I mean, again, it's not really the idea of dimension is in a spatial dimension, but some kind of other quantum field that's just its own thing that can't really be reduced to anything other than what it is. And it's still, it's still interacting with everything else, all the matter, but it's something that you can't really in some sense it's separate from everything else, and it's just you can't reduce it to anything.
So like representing it in the lowest number of dimensions possible, which would be the waveform in one dimension.
I mean, yeah, we're getting to the limits of my understanding of all this quantum
Sure.
uh quantum field theory stuff. But I mean, I my understanding is it would still have to be three dimensions, and again,
Mm.
it would really be like a proper like extra dimension. It would more just be something that's separate that we can't
Hmm.
directly. Well, we're interacting with it, but we can't. Yeah, like I said, we can't break it down into anything, any smaller parts.
Yeah, so that would be like a conceptual dimension, right?
Right.
Which I think can be a really valuable way to look at things.
Hmm.
But again, I would say even going into the physical dimension, uh, I think it's possible to represent consciousness in any arbitrary number of dimensions, and maybe the reason why we perceive this world as being three dimensions is because that's the framework by which this makes sense, by which physical uh, laws seem to manifest in a way that tie things together to give constancy, right? To give it a shape that is relatable, is understandable.
So is your idea that there's kind of like an infinite number of different iterations of the universe with different numbers of dimensions, kind of
Yeah.
up to like an infinite number of dimensions?
Yes.
Yeah. I still don't think I buy that. I think I kind of see your point. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, yeah, it is an interesting question. If you know, if the idea that there are like an infinite number of little island universes happening that each kind of have a different set of fundamental laws,
Mm-hmm.
like which of those are there any of those that don't change randomly?
Mm-hmm. And it actually it goes a little bit. My concept of this goes a little bit different from that. Just our infinite number of dimensions and infinite number of worlds, because I think that in this world right now, things can be represented in a meaningful way in different numbers of dimensions. And so, as the nature of the things, of the ideas changes to the point where it makes more sense to represent them in a different number of dimensions, then our perception of the world will change to represent that world in that number of dimensions.
Right, but what could possibly initiate a change like that?
I have no idea. I don't know. I think it's just one of those things where perception. I think as you change your perception of the world, then it's your perception of the world that is tangible. That is your experience. And so if your perception of the world is it is in three dimensions and that's how things make sense, well, that's fine and good. And if your understanding of the world grows and evolves into this thing that can't fit in three dimensions, and suddenly it makes more sense to think about it in four dimensions, and you do that, then you're experiencing a world in four dimensions, and that's all there is to it.
uh, yeah, I still don't know about that.
Why not?
Well, because you, well, okay. What does it mean to experience something in four dimensions? And like, do you actually believe that like if you just keep living and you have like the right insight, or are quote unquote like looking at things in the right way, you could actually change the number of dimensions you're living in?
It seems possible to me. I won't make an assertion. This I know is crazy out there stuff, but since we're talking about Terence McKenna, I feel emboldened, and I'll say it seems quite possible to me.
Yeah. I kind of lost it, I guess. Is this an idea that he actually had, or is this?
I I don't think he's ever framed it in these particular terms. This is just kind of the way that I look at it. But I
Yeah.
do know that he has talked about transcending the physical plane,
Hmm. Yeah, of course.
or I think also into a higher number of dimensions. He talked about that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know that's something people say a lot to describe a DMT trip.
Hmm.
That you're, yeah, that there's this kind of extra dimensional geometry, and somehow the geometry is conveying ideas and meaning.
Yeah.
So I think this segues nicely into something I wanted to talk about, which is the question of whether psychedelics are conferring true knowledge.
Hmm.
Or I think I guess the question is more when are they conferring true knowledge and when are they not?
Hmm. Well, let me tell you, Trevor, I have a clear and concise answer for that.
Yeah. What is it?
I don't know.
Did you come to that conclusion under the influence of psychedelics?
No comment.
I think it is an interesting question, because when you're in these states, there are things that can just seem so true,
Hmm.
so obviously true,
Hmm.
and like viscerally true, that it's hard to see that they could be wrong. And yeah, the big example of this for me was realizing that free will doesn't exist
Hmm.
the second time I took acid. And it had been a thought I'd been kind of playing around with in my head, but
Hmm.
but but yeah, during that experience, it just kind of came crashing down on me.
Hmm. I don't know. I think it's, I mean, kind of a cliche, but you could say that psychedelics are kind of just like jet fuel. You're pouring onto what's there already. And if you have this framework, this idea you're playing with that, oh, these words, free will doesn't exist, then when you do the psychedelics, you'll see the truth in that. And it's a certainty, right? It's like a knowledge, but it's also possible to get drawn into falsehoods as well, false certainties. Like, people will describe knowing that they are going to die from the psychedelic trip, and then it's just being caught in a loop in your head, and you're totally fine, and there's been no lasting damage afterward.
Right. Right. And yeah. Part of the reason I wanted to bring this up is there's this famous story about Terence and his brother Dennis at this place La Chorrera, which is somewhere in South America, and they took mushrooms for like every day for I think like 2 weeks or something, and just spent it like frantically trying to transcribe what the mushroom was telling them. Yeah. Which yeah, I can't imagine doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know. I think it entirely depends on what you bring to it, and you'll see the truth in the ideas that you bring to it. And if you're just looking for it for answers, I mean, you might get anything.
yeah, and in the end, even if there's some crazy thing that feels like it was just beamed into your head from something external to you, like it all has to come from either like direct input from your environment or ideas that were already there and are just being connected in different ways.
Yeah.
Because that's also part of what these substances do is allow different parts of your brain to communicate that normally wouldn't.
Although I will say, like, I agree on that 100%. It's all things that were in your head, and they're just being connected in new ways. I will say, I think I can appreciate how Terence McKenna could come to a perception of it being stuff being beamed in from an external source, because I have had an experience on a very small amount of mushrooms. Nonetheless, it felt like I was the mushrooms. I know, I know how that sounds. I had the experience. I was this psychedelic substance perceiving the world through the membrane that was this human body that I called Eric.
Yeah, well, I mean, if your identity starts to break down, then there's kind of no distinction there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The mushroom is taking Eric.
There's a Neil Gaiman short novel about like the underworld of London. It's this kind of fantastical world, and there's these like mushroom people, and there's this entity that's called the mushroom, and like at the market, the mushroom people have the mushroom there, and then they slice bits off of the mushroom and sell them as food. And if you eat the raw mushroom, then the spores get in you and convert you into a mushroom person whose sole desire is to spread the spores of the mushroom.
Wow. Yeah. Fungi are weird things. They're, yeah.
Well, you know what they say about Paul Stamets.
I don't know who that is, so I don't know what they say about him.
He's a fun guy.
Boo.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, kind of loose connection, but I do think it's interesting to talk about what his opinions on art were. And this kind of goes along with the culture thing. Because one of his things was you shouldn't consume culture, you should create it. Like you shouldn't just mindlessly be consuming whatever popular media is feeding you.
Yeah.
You should be more focused on creating and you know, forging relationships with your friends. Which, you know, I agree with mostly, but like part of what we bond over with our friends is culture. Is shared cultural experience.
How would you define culture?
It's a good question. I think it's the set of values in a society. It's the set of ideas in a society, and it's the collection of. I would say art plays a big part in defining it, including like fashion and literature.
So could we maybe generalize it to say that culture is a finite set of ideals that we sort of cling to as a group of people, and in so doing find an identity therein?
Yeah, they're the things that distinguish us from other groups of people.
So that we know that we kill everyone else.
Right. all the people who listen to pop country. Notice I didn't say country. I said pop country.
That is country today. Anyway.
But I not recently, but I remember hearing at some point Terence McKenna talk about how he felt like there wasn't really the music out there that was like inspiring us to create this new culture and to kind of further this psychedelic revolution that was happening. And I always kind of wondered what music he was envisioning. I did see, but I did see somewhere like recently this past week about him talking about how much he kind of appreciated trance culture. So I guess maybe that's part of it. But the fact that like in that situation, it is about like bonding with your friends, and there's way less sexual repression, and it's kind of giving yourself up to the moment and just living in the moment, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which kind of almost seems in line with like passive consumerism, right? Because that also is about just, well, maybe that's the difference. Maybe passive consumerism is less about living in the moment and more about hiding from the moment.
Yeah, it's hiding from the moment and hiding from contemplating like existence and
Mm.
and death and all that stuff, and just kind of continually just searching for the next little hit of dopamine of just kind of uh base satisfaction.
I've definitely felt that in popular culture and in uh, communities, like in high school and that sort of situation, there's a very powerful fear of silence and of stillness.
Yeah, someone always has to be like awkward silence.
Yeah, right. Why can't it just be a comfortable silence
Yeah,
or a pregnant silence?
yeah. Yeah, and I mean I even find this with myself when I'm just at home alone. Like I almost always I'm like listening to music, or I'm listening to a podcast or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often do as well, and often I am aware that I'm getting stuck in that pattern and will try to give myself some space for silence, even if it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it forces you to confront your thoughts.
Mm. Or phrased another way, your thoughts are no longer masked. There's nothing for them to hide behind, and so you see them.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing to distract you from them.
Mm.
Yeah, I think Terence McKenna also described culture as a childish illusion that's also an intelligence test.
Huh.
So like if you're smart enough, you'll realize that it's just kind of a construction that's holding you in these boxes, but the boxes are kind of arbitrary,
Mm-hmm.
and they're distracting you from your full potential and what's real. Kind of in the same way he talked about religion as distracting like from true spiritual experiences.
Right. As a construct that we've erected around an idea which hides the idea.
So yeah, we didn't really mention it directly, but if you hadn't heard of Terence McKenna before, and are interested in what we're talking about, there are literally hours and hours on YouTube of just him talking about really interesting stuff.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm glad he was a person.
Key takeaway.
Key takeaway.
Mm.